Welcome to this explainer. Okay, you know the ones I'm talking about? Those crazy, gleaming architectural renderings of futuristic utopias? Flying cars, autonomous transit, flawlessly spotless streets. But today, we're diving into the architecture of failed perfection. It's this fascinating and honestly kind of disastrous story of how these quote-unquote perfect cities go horribly, horribly wrong.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever actually wondered why billion-dollar perfect cities just become absolute ghost towns? I mean, throughout history, we've seen governments and billionaires pour literally infinite resources into building these massive, smart cities from absolute scratch. We're talking about places like Masdar City in the UAE, Songdo in South Korea, or, those vast, incredibly empty avenues of Ordos in China. These projects launched with billions in funding, the best technologists on Earth, and these grand, sweeping visions of a utopian future built right in the middle of a desert or on reclaimed ocean land. Yet somehow, decades later, the streets are just dead empty.
There's this seriously chilling contrast between the utopian promise we're sold and the actual reality on the ground. Like on paper, these cities promise seamless, frictionless living backed by limitless funding. Everything is perfectly, meticulously calculated. But when the concrete finally dries, these places actually transform into psychological nightmares for the people living in them. It is incredibly eerie when an environment engineered specifically for human thriving becomes, well, completely and psychologically hostile to it. Instead of these vibrant community hubs, you just get these sterile, silent corridors. It's wild.
So that brings us to our first major theme, the utopian smart city dream, building from scratch. It's about the incredible hubris of builders looking at a completely empty map and deciding, yeah, I can engineer a perfect society from the top down.
And here is a profound truth we really need to understand right off the bat. Perfect smart cities do not fail because they run out of money. It's so easy for the ultra-wealthy to believe that capital can just solve any urban design problem, right? Take a place like Forest City in Malaysia. It's a $100 billion mega project meant to house hundreds of thousands of people, and it currently sits eerily abandoned. Why? Because you simply cannot purchase organic community growth. Real cities, they evolve naturally around resources or trade routes or messy, vibrant cultural hubs. They grow organically over centuries. A smart city basically tries to plant a plastic tree and expects it to grow deep roots. You can buy the concrete, the sensors, the perfectly manicured green spaces, but no amount of funding can buy the natural, messy, beautiful way a real community forms and binds together over time.
Moving on to our next section, the architecture of isolation, design as dictatorship. What's really interesting about this is how, rather than bringing citizens together organically, these physical layouts literally dictate how people move, essentially trapping them in the architect's rigid vision. We actually see a very specific historical pattern emerge in these planned societies. It's something defined in urban planning as the emperor and forbidden places structure. To break this down simply, imagine a city where power, commerce, and planning radiate outward from a central, untouchable authority. This creates completely sterile zones. In this model, you've got massive residential blocks strictly separated from commerce or entertainment. You can't just, walk downstairs to grab a coffee. No, you have to take an automated shuttle to a designated commercial zone. This architecture creates deep, profound isolation and literally forces ritual onto the inhabitants. When every single pathway and every building's function is rigidly pre-planned, it totally kills the accidental interactions that make a city feel alive. You completely lose the chance of just bumping into a neighbor at a corner bodega. The architecture dictates your behavior, leaving absolutely no room for spontaneity.
Which leads us to the next piece of the puzzle, the science of collapse, the hubris of the closed loop. We're going to shift gears a bit and look at the hidden sociological fragility inherently built into these engineered, high-density social systems.
Let's see how this builds, because this collapse actually happens in a predictable scientific domino effect. Let's walk through these dominoes together. Step one begins with a total lack of organic growth. Because the city didn't evolve naturally, it simply cannot adapt. The streets are too wide, the zoning is way too strict. And this directly triggers step two, resource depletion. When a rigid system faces a sudden economic downturn or a shift in what the population needs, it just can't pivot. The massive infrastructure becomes this monumental financial drain to maintain because, frankly, there aren't enough people paying into it. And finally, we hit the fatal step three, a total breakdown in community behavior. The social fabric just completely unravels. The few people actually living there experience profound isolation, which often leads to rising crime rates, a total lack of civic pride, and ultimately a mass exodus back to older, messier cities that actually, function.
This brilliantly illustrates the macro versus the micro scale of human survival. Think about a theoretical model like a Type 1 civilization on the Kardashev scale. That's a concept astrophysicists use to describe a society capable of harnessing literally all of the energy of its home planet. Achieving that scale strictly requires organic, evolving global cooperation. Now, contrast that vast natural adaptability with high-density planned smart cities. Because these smart cities are artificially engineered and utterly lacking in natural organic growth, they become incredibly fragile. They're trying to force human cooperation through algorithms and concrete rather than just letting it develop naturally. And let me tell you, a society forced together by an algorithm, it shatters the very second it faces real-world stress. And that brings us to our final section, the unpredictable human variable, the ultimate clash. This is the absolute bottom line on why human nature is just never going to fit neatly into a pre-planned, perfectly engineered utopia. So the crucial point is that these billion-dollar projects are ultimately failing because they're built as closed-loop simulations. They're designed on computer screens by people who kind of think humanity operates like a predictable mathematical formula. They completely ignore the messy, dynamic, and wonderfully chaotic reality of how real human beings actually live, adapt, and interact with their environments. Think about something as simple as a desire path. You know those dirt trails you always see cutting across perfectly manicured park lawns? The architect designed a beautiful right-angled paved sidewalk, but humans, being unpredictable and efficient, just walked straight across the grass to save time. Smart cities try to pave over every desire path before the humans even arrive. And they fail because you simply cannot simulate the endless, wonderful unpredictability of a million human choices.
Okay, let's summarize why this so-called perfection fails so consistently. First, money absolutely cannot solve the root issue. Throwing $100 billion at a structural ghost town is not going to magically give it a soul. Second, these cities act as closed-loop simulations, entirely cut off from natural urban evolution and adaptation. And finally, the ultimate takeaway here, they simply cannot survive the unpredictability of human nature. Humans are wild, we're adaptable, and we are deeply unpredictable. That beautiful unpredictability is always, inevitably, going to break an artificially perfect system. Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought. Can the unpredictability of human nature ever truly be engineered into a closed-loop simulation? As we watch future tech billionaires and governments continue to announce these massive, shiny new smart cities, I really want you to keep this question in mind. Think about the incredible hubris behind trying to code human spontaneity. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a fresh new lens to view the cities of tomorrow. Keep questioning the architecture around you.